Hey everyone, how are you doing? You have Mike and Sierra here, and today what we're going to do is basically teach you guys how to look at the back of any fish food label and basically know exactly what's in it, what it's going to do for your fish, how it's going to color your fish, and basically give you all the knowledge that you need to know to pick up any bag of food and decide if it's right for you.
Yeah, so basically, we're going to get into ingredients. We're going to get into some of the tricks the manufacturers use to kind of make their food see better, and all the other information on how to actually pick a quality fish food and what you should be looking for.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're going to start off and say right from the get-go is there is no perfect fish food. There's none that's even close to being perfect. And this is because we don't really have a need for it. Now, if you look at cats and dog food, you're going to see food that is 100% human egg grade food. And it's because there's a market for it. And people will pay $50, $60, even higher for a bag of food, which with our fish, we're really not going to see that. So the top quality foods that we have are pretty much about the cap of what someone's going to pay for a quality food.
Yeah, so basically, none of it is ever going to be safe for humans to eat or considered human grade food, where the dog food, cat food manufacturers, a lot of their consumers have absolutely demanded that they come up with an alternative that is whole, natural, and not using anything that might be possibly toxic to their animals. Where in the fish food industry, a lot of people treat their fish simply as fish.
Yeah.
So, considering the fact that they're not treated pets the same as dogs or cat would be for most people, it just there isn't as much of a demand or need for it.
Yeah.
Where, like Mike was saying, a lot of people just aren't willing to pay the extra expense for what it would take to have the perfect fish food.
Yeah. And basically, what happened is, so since we know that we don't have a perfect fish food companies basically subsidize quality ingredients for lesser ingredients in order to bring prices down. And that's unfortunately where we stand with fish foods, and they're all like that. You won't find a perfect one out there.
There are some pretty good quality foods, though, that you will see, and the quality definitely has improved. There are newer companies coming out there, coming up with different formulas and things of that nature, so there are some pretty good ones. But perfect is a different story. Okay, so let's start out by saying that most manufacturers would prefer you be unaware of what you're feeding your fish. The less you know, the easier it is to pass off a low quality food as something that is a high quality food. So a lot of tricks are used in the fish food industry. Now, not every company does this, but a good portion of them do. One of these tricks is that fish food is going to be listed by weight. So legally, in the order in the ingredients, the first ingredient, the primary ingredient, should be listed first. Now, what happens is that manufacturers are allowed to list this at its wet weight. So this means before the fish is processed, basically they take into account the whole weight of the fish with the ice, everything like that, and it can make it misleading. Basically, something that might show up first and should be a primary ingredient, once it's dried, might actually move further down the list. So that is one thing to keep in mind. You want to be going with a reputable company, and you're preferring to look for things that have meal at the end, basically, because meal implies that it has already been processed. Okay, so first we're going to get into the main ingredients you're going to see, which is going to be your proteins. So there's going to be preferred proteins and non-preferred proteins. Let's start with the preferred ones. So ideally in a fish food, you are looking for a whole fish meal. Basically, whole fish implies that the whole fish is being used, not just the leftovers. When it comes to fish meal, really that's just a low-grade product that is basically the scraps of what humans eat. So the eyes, the leftovers, the carcasses, that basically gets ground up and that becomes your fish meal. So in terms of nutrition, it's not all that it really could be. So you are preferring to look for a whole fish meal. When it does come to it, if they name it, that's better than having just some unnamed or random meal. So if you can figure out what it is and they list like whole herring or whole salmon, that's going to be preferred to just some random whole fish meal. So basically, let's look at what whole fish meal is. So by definition in the industry, whole fish meal, all it is either a whole fish or part of a fish that has been dried with the oils extracted. Now, when you take the oils and you re-add it back to that dried fish, that by definition becomes whole fish meal. So it is possible that people or manufacturers are misleading the general public with their whole fish meal. basically by implying that it comes from the whole fish, the fillet and all, when in fact all they're doing is re-adding the oils back to the fish. So you do want to be careful of this, and this is where picking a quality manufacturer comes into play, where you want to have some trust, basic trust level into the manufacturer. You want to be able to ask them questions and get as much information as possible as you can on their product. I find the ones that are more forthcoming with their ingredients and are willing to talk to you about it tend to be a better quality. You want someone that's going to stand behind what they're selling ultimately. So other protein sources you're going to find in things like algae, spirulina, plant matter, vegetables. Those are going to be things that should be the basis of your herbivore food. Now, a lot of foods marketed for herbivores aren't actually a true herbivore food. You're going to see this in the ingredients though. If you're reading and the first things you're seeing are fish meal and meat proteins rather than plant proteins, you know for a fact that is just a clever marketing tactic, where basically they're just marketing for herbivores without it actually really having the vegetables or plant matter to actually back it up. So now we're going to get into preferred proteins. I'm going to break them down a little bit. We're going to look at some of the actual ingredients that you would see. We'll just give you a basic idea of what they're doing for your fish and then the benefits and things like that. But you definitely want to check out the article that we got this information from. We'll make sure to include the links in the description, but it's great. The guy that has been doing it has been in the hobby over 30 years and has spent I don't know how much time putting together this awesome resource on fish food ingredients, really breaking down what they are and what they do. So let's get into our preferred proteins. So one of the common ones you're going to see is going to be whole salmon or whole herring meal. This is a really common ingredient in the higher end foods. Now, salmon specifically is high in omega-3 and 6, and it has astaxanthin in it. Basically, that's a great color enhancer. We're going to get into color enhancing specifically with Mike in just a few minutes. But basically, great natural color enhancer. And something like herring, that's going to also be, it's actually going to have more omega-3s and 6s than you would see in salmon. It doesn't have quite as many color enhancing properties, but still a very good basis for a fish food. You're always going to prefer to see something where you actually know the fish being used. They're a little bit preferred over just some random fish meal. It usually means they put a little bit more care into it. So let's look at krill meal. It's a great source of astaxanthin, which is going to be the natural color enhancer. It's a great protein source, amino acids, omega-3s. It's an antioxidant, so there are a lot of benefits to having krill and using that in a fish food. Shrimp meal, that's another really common one you see along with krill. Shrimp meal isn't quite as high in astaxanthin or color enhancing properties as krill would be, and it's not quite as high in protein as a normal fish meal. It's an alright ingredient. It's not the best, it's not the worst. Now we have plankton, which is actually going to be very similar to krill with those color enhancing properties. So that one's super similar to what the benefits you would see with krill. Now earthworm meal, that's another common ingredient you're going to see. That one has been shown to be really good for breeding fish. They say that it can help with growth and enhance appetite and basically enhance breeding behaviors. So if you're looking at breeding, earthworm meal is actually a great choice for that. Now let's look at our veggies. So spirulina, that's a very common one that you're going to see in fish food, and there's good reason for it. It is rich in protein, vitamin A's, B's, C's, E's, just all kinds of vitamins, minerals. It's a natural color enhancer. It's an antioxidant. There are just so many benefits to spirulina. It's really one of those superfoods. So spirulina in an ingredient in a fish food is absolutely ideal just from all the benefits from it. From the color enhancing to the antioxidant properties to the vitamins and the minerals, it really is an ideal choice. Now we're going to have algae meal. So this is basically made from blue-green algae. It's not as preferred as spirulina would be, but it still has a lot of those same properties and is still a quality ingredient. Another one we see commonly is kelp. So that's a seaweed. It's a natural source of vitamin K, vitamin C, other minerals and trace elements. It also helps with the thyroid function. So kelp is also a preferred ingredient, especially for those herbivores. That would be one of the first things you would want to see, the spirulina algae or kelp. So of course there are other ingredients that are used. I mean, there's hundreds of foods out there. We're just going to cover the most common ones that we see. Okay, so let's get into our non-preferred proteins. So, before we start this off, let's get into another trick that they like to use. This is going to be product splitting. So basically, when you're reading the label, if you're seeing wheat come up 4 or 5 times, the wheat germ, the wheat grain, the wheat mill, the wheat flour, if you're seeing this come up or other ingredients come up like cornstarch, corn gluten, corn meal, any kind of corn, if it's coming up 4 or 5 times, this is an example of product splitting. Basically, they do this because they legally have to list their ingredients in order of weight. So to make it seem that in total it's less or a less portion of the food, they will list them individually. This makes you think that maybe this wheat or corn or whatever it is that they're using is a smaller percentage of the food than it really is. So that is something to watch out for. If you're seeing it listed 4 or 5 times on the food, it's safe to say it's usually just full of fillers in a way to really kind of trick you into thinking that it's less than it really is. So let's get into some of these unpreferred fillers, proteins, why they're used. So the reasons they're going to be used is because they're cheap, easily available. They're byproducts of other industries, so again, cheap, easily available. And a lot of them are known to put weight on fish. So a lot of fish foods are designed not for the long-term health of the fish, but to really put on weight, like they would use in a commercial application, which when you're using that at home for your personal fish is not something you're looking for. Because again, it's designed to put on weight, fatten them up, and not really considering the long-term health effects. So just because a food is high in protein, that does not mean that it's coming from a preferred protein source. So that's something you want to look out for. So one of the common ones that you're going to see, some of them are going to be used as binders to actually make these pellets or put the food together, the flake, which is fine in a small percentage. But if you're seeing it listed in the first few ingredients, usually that is a pretty good indication that more of it is being used than we would like. So Brewer's dried yeast. That's one you're going to see very commonly. It's a byproduct of the beer industry with brewers. It does have a high protein content and does have vitamin B in it. So if it's being used as a supplement just for the vitamin B content, that's not a big deal. If you're seeing it, again, listed high in the ingredient list, that's not something that you would prefer to see. Okay, so corn gluten meal, cornstarch, another common ingredient you're going to see. These are used as binders. Now, if this is being used as a protein source, this is when it's really not ideal because they do have some protein in them, but the digestibility is questionable. Okay, and now we have dehulled soybean meal. That is a preferred binder source. It's a lot more expensive than some of the corn or wheat-based products, so it isn't used very commonly as a binder. It's normally used as a filler, which is going to be to increase that protein content, and that's really essentially what we're doing, is increasing the protein content. As a binder, not bad. In the first few ingredients or repeated often throughout is not something we want to see. So another thing you see commonly is feeding oatmeal. Basically, this is what's left over after what you had for breakfast has been processed. So these are really just the ends and the leftovers. It's a really cheap protein source, and that's the main benefit of it. Another one you're going to see, gluten flour, also high in protein, no real health or substantial benefits otherwise. Ground brown rice is actually a quality grain, but it is not something that we prefer to see as a protein source. Potato protein, that's one basically another cheap protein source that they're using. Rice bran, it actually has some minerals, but again, many are using it as a protein source or a filler. Next, we're going to have soy flour, soybean isolate, and soybean meal. Basically, these are used oftentimes as binders or as a protein source. So again, as a binder, it's preferred over wheat and other fillers like that, but it is not something you want to see comprise a good percentage of your food. Wheat germ meal. It does have vitamin E and some minerals. It's preferred over wheat flour as a binder, but it's not something we want to be seeing used as a main protein source. Now we have wheat gluten meal. This one's basically just used for protein, just to boost that content. Again, not something we want to see comprise a big portion of our food. Wheat flour. This one's commonly used as a binder, and again, as a binder, it does serve its purposes, but not something we want to see high up in that ingredients list. So again, there are way more binders and fillers and things like that and other ingredients that are going to be used in your foods. For that, I highly recommend doing some research on it yourself, but definitely check out the article that we left a link to. It is absolutely an amazing resource for basically all of this information and going further into depth into some of these other crazy ingredients. Okay, so before we get into more secondary ingredients, we're going to go over to Mike. He's going to look at some of the things that are added to fish foods for color enhancing properties. Specifically, we're going to look at natural color enhancers and things that will naturally aid in the coloration of your fish.
All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about coloration in your fish foods. So before we go too far, I do want to talk about carotenoids because we are going to hear this word a couple of times in this part here. And this is basically just an organic pigment that's found in pretty much everything. Your vines, your trees, your leaves, your plants, your hard shells, shrimps, all that stuff, okay? So for your reds, Canthaxanthin, as we already know, is an awesome source. So you can come in synthetic powder, or you can use things like cayenne peppers, krill, shrimp. Basically, all these things all have Canthaxanthin in it, and it works really, really well for red. Now, your oranges are kind of a little bit different. Now, you have specific fish foods that really kind of put paprika in your fish food, which is really great for orange, actually. Some fish food companies like Paradigm, Hikari, for your blood parrots, they're going to have a high content of paprika, and they're going to have cayenne peppers. Now, cayenne peppers, like we said, are another source of Canthaxanthin. So these foods here are specifically kind of more for your reds and your oranges, not just your reds. So me, preferably for my orange fish, which 90% of my fish are orange, minus Kiko, it's some foods just aren't really set for these guys. And unfortunately, my Northfin that I feed isn't really preferred for oranges. So we do have to supplement a little bit just to kind of boost the color of the oranges in our fish. Not saying it's not a great product. It still is a great product. Just more set for my Kiko or some other fish. So zeaxanthin and lutein, I've got it on the screen because I don't know if I pronounced it right, but these here are really going to help with your yellows. So these are some awesome carotenoids that are going to help with your yellows and bring them out. So they can be found in things like egg yolks, yellow peppers, stuff like that. Once again, plants. It always comes back to plants, vegetables, stuff like that. These are where these carotenoids are naturally found. So for your greens, your blues, your stuff like that's going to be your spirulinas and your algae. And that basically gives you a kind of understanding of what actually ingredients are used to actually color your fish. So we have your reds, which is your Canthaxanthin. We have your blues and greens, which is your spirulina. We have your oranges, which is going to be products like paprika and stuff like that. I don't know if I mentioned this, but paprika has, I believe, like 20 different types of carotenoids in it for that. So it is a very color-enhancing product and natural. And then again, we have our zeaxanthin, and lutein, which are going to help with your yellows. Comes from egg yolks. So let's get back to Sierra. She's going to talk a little bit more about vitamins and minerals.
Okay, so let's get into some of our secondary ingredients, things like vitamins, minerals, and other things you're going to see. So garlic. Garlic is a great antioxidant. It's a flavor enhancer. There are so many benefits to it. It's really a great ingredient. It helps detoxify heavy metals from the body. It is an anti-inflammatory and more. So garlic is a great ingredient to see in the fish food. Now some other vitamins. The one you want to stay away from is going to be called synthetic vitamin K. We're going to put up on the screen, but this is going to be known by a few different names. But basically, synthetic vitamin K in certain doses has proved to be toxic, so it's really not something that we ideally want to see. Vitamin K is something that is essential for your fish, but you're going to want to have it come from things like algae, plants, kelp, things like that are very high in it. So let's get into some of the other minerals and vitamins you specifically want to look for. Vitamin C, A, E's, and B's are going to be the most essential vitamins that you're specifically looking for your fish. So let's look at some of the common ones. So first we're going to have calcium Montmorillonite clay. I may have totally butchered that. But that basically, it's a clay. It's packed full of over 67 minerals. It helps detoxify and replenish dietary deficiencies. So it is an overall great ingredient. This is one specifically that you're going to find in fish foods on the higher end, like Northfin and things like that. So Canthaxanthin is another ingredient you might see. It's a natural orange and yellow carotenoid. It also helps with vitamin A deficiency, so another good ingredient to have in there. Chlorella Algae. This is another great ingredient. So this one's high in protein. It's a super antioxidant, and it's packed with vitamins and other trace minerals. So another great choice to have in a fish food. Choline Chloride. That enhances growth and prevents fatty liver disease. So not a bad idea to have that in there as well. Dehydrated Alfalfa Meal. You're going to see this in some of them. It's basically used for vitamins, minerals, trace elements, and other nutrients. And then we have beta carotene, which is a great carotenoid for oranges. It's also a great source of vitamin A, and it aids in the immune system. So another quality ingredient you're going to see. So another ingredient you see commonly is DL-Methionine. Basically, this is an amino acid. It's naturally found in meats. This is sometimes used to boost protein content of the food, so that's something to be mindful of. Sometimes when they're supplementing with that, it means that they're trying to boost their protein content, basically by using preferred proteins. Next, we're going to have spinach. Spinach is a great source of vitamin K naturally, so that's another preferred ingredient. Next, we have zinc oxide. This aids with immune function and also helps the body naturally produce insulin. Now, there's all kinds of other vitamins and minerals that are used within fish foods, but basically this should give you at least an idea of some of the more common ones. The idea is you want to be able to look at the back of the fish food and at least know at least 80 to 90%, if not all of the ingredients that are being used, why they're being used, and if there are any potential harms or risks using them. A lot of ingredients that are used in fish foods or lower quality ones are potentially toxic to fish in certain doses or are cause more harm than good. So definitely something you want to do research on. Now let's look at things you absolutely don't want to see in your food. So that's going to be things like synthetic vitamin K because of its mild toxicity. It's going to be the non-preferred proteins, so a ton of binders, fillers, things like that. So that's going to be 5 kinds of wheats, product splitting, things like that you don't want to see. Artificial dyes and colors. This is another thing you don't want to see. Many of these artificial dyes and colors are banned in certain countries because they're known carcinogens. So to be feeding this to your fish is really not ideal. If you see something like artificial or natural and artificial coloring listed in the ingredients, that's an indication right there that you have dye in the food. Now, some of these dyes, like I said, are known carcinogen in some countries and are definitely not something you want to be feeding to your fish. Really, the only reason to add them is to visually make the fish food look more appealing to us. It doesn't actually do any benefits to the fish. It's really just for our own aesthetic. Some low-quality fish foods are to the point where they even leach those dyes back in the tank. So, I mean, this is not something that you're going to want in your fish food. If you can avoid it, definitely avoid it. Mike gave all kinds of other natural color enhancers that are great choices that work even more effectively at enhancing the color of fish without the health risks and side effects. So another thing we don't want to see in our food is potential carcinogens. So this is just going to be some of the ingredients that are used that are byproducts of industry and that are unknown. Some of these things are potential carcinogens to your fish, so you do want to know as much as possible the ingredients that are being used. Another thing we don't want to see is protein coming from mammal and poultry and other human sources. Basically, we want our fish eating an aquatic diet. That's what they would normally eat in their natural environment, and we want to replicate that as best as possible. We don't know the risks or what will happen to feeding these different mammals to fish, but it's not something ideal. They are high in fat and really high in cholesterol, which is not something you want to be feeding to your pet. The last thing we don't want to see is artificial preservatives like ethoxyquin. So this is something that basically for fish food companies to transport fish meal by boat, they legally have to add a preservative because it is a combustible substance. So they're usually using ethoxyquin because it's the cheapest, most readily available, effective preservative out there. This is something that's proven to be a carcinogen. There are other preservatives that also have these same effects. So generally speaking, preservatives are something that we want to avoid. Many quality fish foods won't use preservatives or will use a safer form of that preservative. So that way there, you're not risking the health of your animal.
All right, everyone. So I really hope you do enjoy this video. It definitely took a lot of work. We had probably about 20 pages here of information to go through. So I hope it wasn't too long for you guys, and you guys do have a good understanding now when you look at the back of a fish food label, what exactly it's going to do for you. So we really thank everyone for watching, and you guys have yourself a great day.